I have an hour and 20-minute presentation created. They told me I get 15 minutes, so it's kind of like speed dating. So I appreciate you inviting me. I'm surprised anybody invites me back to speak anymore, because I have a lot of speaking engagements, but I tend to offend both sides of the political spectrum. So I can assure you that will happen. And sometimes people chase me out of the building and say, now what about this, what about that? And what's going to be even worse today is my hour and 20 minutes will be compressed into 15. So a lot of what I do is present data followed by analysis. So you're going to see the data very quickly. And I'm going to draw a conclusion. You say, that doesn't make sense. Well, you don't have the 20 to 25 minutes for each piece of data. So I will do my best. And if I keep looking down, I'm so conscious of the time. I put my little clock down there so I don't mess up. Because I heard they're going to point a laser at me in a minute. That scares me. So the title of my presentation is An Economy at Risk. And no surprise, we've got some pretty tough situations right now. Again, I'm going to run through these part of the slides, but the summary of what you're seeing here is unemployment data, which I think most of you are already familiar with. You know these numbers. Things are looking great, but, as we say in math, things are starting to become what we call concave down. Things have been going well. We see very good unemployment numbers for Indiana, specifically here in the Midwest. We are the dominant economic force. There's no question about it. You look at our employment numbers, they have started to trend down a little bit, whether it's regular full employment, or whether it's manufacturing, or whether it's the participation rate. We are ahead of the rest of the country in the participation rate. A lot of my peers have said, oh, well, participation will perpetually fall because we have an aging population. Well, apparently it's not. It has turned around in the last few years. Indiana really has done a great job on that. Exports, I'll save that for later. One of the things that I look at when I see where is the future of the economy is I like to look at building permits. This is a very good indicator of how things are going in the future. So I look at year-over-year building permits. And if you compare those to Indiana, you saw coming out of the recession this really big boom, and then we saw a slow decline, and we've seen, again, a little bit of a decline in the last few quarters. Corporate profits were soaring, and now they've kind of slowed. They're still growing, but at a slower rate. And the big indicator for me, okay, so I know I rushed through all these, that's like 20 minutes you just saw in 2. And what I'm telling you is that the economy's been going great from an employment standpoint, and it's still going good. It hasn't yet gone over the cliff, but it's still growing, but not at quite the same rate. But this is what scares me. This happened yesterday. This piece of data comes out every month. I consider it the best piece of data out there because it's real time, directly from private businesses. PMI, I'm sure many of you have seen this. If the number is above 50, that means we're growing from a manufacturing standpoint. If it's below 50, that means we're contracting. And we have now contracted for 2 months in a row. We have been setting records as far as the increase. And you know, when I would use hyperbole, but no one uses hyperbole better than the president. I don't know if you've heard him. It's fantastic, the best in history that we've ever seen. Not the last 2 months. The last 2 months have started to decline. And data that came out yesterday makes me a bit more nervous, because what it tells me is we might already be in a recession. We might. Because these numbers up here, you notice that most of them are below 50. Again, we don't have time to go into each one of them. But what I notice here is that for 2 months in a row now, new orders have been contracting. That's not what you want. You want businesses to be expanding their orders. At the same time, even though there is a contracting in orders, you also see a contraction in employment, you see a contraction in inventories, and you see a contraction in backlogs, meaning there's not a backlog anymore. So companies, just a few months ago, there was a backlog of orders, not anymore. So this is a sign to me, a real-time indicator of a contraction that's occurring in the economy. But this is the nerd in me. I love this. I'm a recovering actuary. So you can't get enough of this. You know why people become actuaries, right? They don't have a dynamic enough personality to become an undertaker. So, the actuaries at One America didn't like that when I told them that a few months ago. So for me, this is what we call it, the implied volatility on the CBOE S&P 500 contract. It's called the VIX. The VIX is, in a very simplistic phrase, the fear index, the uncertainty in the economy. It's the nervousness that the market feels. You can see it real time. It is the second highest volume item traded on CBOE behind the S&P 500. So apparently people are very concerned about risk. And what do we see? Well, what we saw is that when the president was elected, the fear index spiked through the roof instantly. I know this because on campus, the next week after the election, we had a healing session. You think I'm kidding? That's actually what we called it. It was kind of insane that we could have such a thing, but we did. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Welcome to the real world. But right after the election, when people calmed down, they said, okay, reduce taxes, reduce regulation, trade. Well, at the time, trade was getting better. So we saw this, if you average it, it was declining. Then right before the midterm elections, it started going up again. And for a lot of factors, and again, we don't have time to analyze it, but the people in Wall Street, while they don't like the president, they liked his policies. And again, I don't care if I'm offending both sides, I will promise to do more of it. But what we found is that the people on Wall Street said, okay, ignore his tweets, we kind of like some of the policies. And then when they saw that there was going to be a change in power, they got more nervous. And so the fear index increased. And then it really spiked right after the midterm elections, and now it's been trending up. Now, I'm not going to say it's the fault of the House or the Democrats. I won't. I think both parties have a lot to blame. And one of the first indicators of this was that the people in Wall Street thought that Nancy Pelosi was a deal maker, and she has not turned out to be a deal maker, and these two sides are now just arguing with each other. Just watch the news every night. And so there's more. I can't get into too much of it because of time, but let me jump ahead and tell you where I see the risk. I see three areas of risk: trade wars, deficits, and socialism, for lack of a better phrase. Now, let me first tell you about the trade wars. The trade wars are scary because in the United States we have $22 trillion of exports, we have over 30 trillion of imports. We are the leaders in the world, and I chose these three because it's Indiana-oriented, of trucks, pork, and corn. We are the exporters of the world in these three areas. And Indiana feels this very much. Again, I don't have time to go into all of these, but as you know, Indiana is a huge export state. We have a lot of foreign direct investment, so a trade war is very harmful to our economy. There's no doubt about that. But so are deficits. Usually when you have an economic recovery, you start running surpluses. You run deficits in recessions, you run surpluses in recoveries. We're in the longest recovery in history as of 2 days ago, 125 months. And we have run the highest deficits also in history. Both parties have done it. President Trump is going to have a $1.2 trillion deficit this year. I guess he's jealous of Obama, so he wants to do even better. And I think he's going to pull it off. And again, this is where the deficits are coming from. The deficit is growing. And this is what scares me. Last year, or a couple of years ago, we had $325 million of interest expense at all-time low interest rates. If we actually have normal interest rates this coming year, average, normal in history, our interest would be $1.1 trillion. Just the interest, that would be the third largest deficit in the history of our country, just the interest. This makes me nervous. But this makes me more nervous. Socialism. Now, consider the spectrum, okay? You've got total free market capitalism, and then you've got Soviet Union socialism. And you got a whole bunch of stuff in between. And this concerns me because we now have a culture and a population that I think is embracing this concept without understanding the concept. That makes me very concerned. Because you just have to look at Greece or Cyprus or Venezuela, and you can see the results. If you were a retiree senior citizen, had your money invested in Greek bonds, you took a 50% haircut back in 2011. If you did the same thing in Cyprus, you took a 47% haircut, and in fact, Greece was going to do it again, but the EU, specifically Germany, bailed them out. Venezuela, we all know what's happened there. As they've embraced more socialism, the top 10% of the population now has 60% of the wealth. Socialism attempts to redistribute wealth. All the data shows us that is not what happens. It becomes more concentrated, and there's less of it to go around. As you can see, by the only country in the world that has a 50% cut in their GDP in the last 10 years. No one has a cut in their GDP. It just grows slower, maybe a recession. And you know all the examples, whether it's China or Russia or you name it. So these are examples, and because of time, I'm just going to jump way far ahead. There's a lot of data in here that shows you freedom versus results. And more success, more success. This is what I want to jump to, simply because of time. I wish I had more time to go into those slides. The fear that I have about our economy and what I consider a big risk is that we are starting to embrace this concept of socialism to a more profound degree. And it's most pronounced in millennials. Millennials see a positive of socialism much more than they do capitalism. And you wonder, why would they think this? I think it's because my daughter and my son and that generation have never experienced economic harm. They can sit in their cafe, they can pick up their phone, and they can get a cab in a minute. They can have food delivered to their apartment with a click of a button, and they can communicate with a friend on the other side of the world. They've never had to go through what we've had to go through. Oh, 2008 was terrible. Those of us that were around in 1980, I think we know what a real recession is. When you have 20% inflation, that's a 20% pay cut. They've never seen that. And when you took polls, the Washington Post did a poll, and they found that many millennials had never even heard of the Holocaust. Try to help me understand how this is a population, and I'm not knocking millennials, I teach them every day. They give me very bad evals, I mean very good evals. And so I'm a fan of the millennials, but I'm very concerned that what they're being taught is not very good. I mean, just look at some of this data. 22 never heard of the Holocaust, 50% don't even know what the USSR, Cuba, China, that they were socialist. They don't even know that. And most of them associate socialism with a higher standard of living. Yet, if you look across the board, nowhere will you see that that's the case. Again, I'm sorry I don't have more time to crunch the data. I'm just giving you the results, which I hate to do. I always like to let you draw the results, so I give you raw data and then you come up with it. So, what do we know about this? Because I see my time is almost up. I think we have an economy at risk. I think the trade war is bad. I believe that the desire for some of our population to have embraced the big parent state is harming, and the solution, I'll come back in another presentation to do that. But I got to wrap up by saying I have a lot of respect for some of my millennials, because we gave a test the other day, and they didn't do too well on it. And so, I said, I was trying to shock them. I said, okay, you're not stupid. You're not stupid. In fact, if you're stupid, stand up. And my best student, Emily, stood up. I said, Emily, why are you standing up? And she said, well, Dr. Will, I didn't want you to stand alone. With that, I guess I got an age of stage left.
Dr. Will. Before we go, is there any questions that anyone has for Dr. Will? I think we can sneak one in. Any questions?
Yes.
Eventually, everyone has purchased what they need. So when we look at being in a recession as long as we were, do economists look at the fact that housing has hit a certain amount, people have bought a certain amount, they don't need the second washer and dryer, so the growth over the last couple of years is going to end up receding a little bit because everyone would have purchased?
No. Let me tell you, the assumption behind a lot of those kind of thoughts is that the pie is fixed. And the truth is the pie can expand. And the way the pie expands is by you have more disposable income. So things you buy cost less. By the way, trade means we buy a cheap thing from China. So that means you have more disposable income. What do you do with your disposable income? Maybe buy a second car. Maybe go on a vacation. Maybe buy some product that some innovator like Steve Jobs will create. So actually, Australia hasn't had a recession in over 20 years. They keep expanding their economy. So part of the assumption in the question, and I'm not saying it's your assumption, but a lot of people think that the pie is fixed, and in fact it's not. It can grow, and it grows because we become more efficient, and we get things better, faster, cheaper. That's a quick answer. I give you a 20-minute answer, but it's not what you're looking for. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for your time.
Round of applause.